J.P. Morgan, in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, knowledge, power, and managerial skill were gathered around this name. If there was something even better known than his enormous fortune, it was his habit of appearing at critical moments and determining the direction of the country's economy. J.P. Morgan held the pulse of America's most profitable sectors and etched his name into economic history with the moves he made. With a single signature, he could save companies on the brink of collapse or bring about the end of massive holding companies. For some, he was the guardian of order. For others, the dark side of power. However, it was accepted by everyone that he was a figure ahead of his time. Today, I will tell you the story of that man who shaped modern America, John Pierpont Morgan. Welcome to the Money Behind History, a place where the hidden details of money, power, and history are discussed. Here, you will discover a world where nothing is as simple as it seems. John Pierpont Morgan was born in 1837 in Connecticut as a child of a well-known family in the financial world. His father, Junior Spencer Morgan, was a highly respected international banker with strong connections on both sides of the Atlantic. From the moment John was born, it was clear that his future would be shaped in finance. For this reason, the education he received was not accidental, but conscious, planned, and designed as a long-term investment. He was educated at the best schools of the time, with private tutors and a Europe-centered perspective. However, behind this privileged beginning was a difficult childhood. Morgan was a child who constantly struggled with illness and was isolated from his peers. He spent his time not with games, but with books and numbers. The loneliness he encountered at an early age greatly influenced his character later in life. As his health problems increased, his father sent him alone to the Azores Islands. Living away from his family for nearly a year, Morgan gained patience and resilience during this period. Perhaps the foundations of his composure in times of crisis were laid during these years. In 1857, at the age of 19, Morgan completed his education in Boston. He had learned a great deal about European financial systems in Switzerland and Germany. Thanks to his father's connections, he began working on Wall Street and reported political and financial developments in America back to London. Despite his young age, he was very good at his job. He analyzed not only data, but also market psychology and political risks. However, his father considered him impulsive and was concerned about his tendency to take risks. This concern turned into a concrete example in 1859. John purchased a large quantity of coffee with company money without having a buyer. Although he made a profit, this move was recorded as the first clear sign of his aggressive financial approach. At just 24 years old, Morgan decided to follow his own path, left the bank, and founded his own company. That same year, he married and experienced a brief period of happiness. However, this did not last long, as his wife fell ill and passed away just 4 months later. After his wife's death, he devoted himself entirely to his work. Meanwhile, the American Civil War had broken out. At the time, military service was mandatory. However, Morgan paid $300 to send a substitute in his place. He never fought in the war, but he made a great deal of money from it. He bought 5,000 rifles that the government had classified as scrap for $3.50 each and sold them for $22. With this transaction, Morgan made a substantial profit and became the target of public criticism. 10 years later, in 1871, John had become a well-known and dominant figure in financial circles. By forming a partnership with Anthony Drexel, one of the most prominent financiers of the era, he established the firm Drexel Morgan. The company quickly became influential in both America and Europe. During this period, he acted more as an intermediary than a traditional banker. He brought together major European investors and visionary American entrepreneurs, earning substantial profits from these partnerships. As his wealth grew, John wanted to take risks and use his capital directly. This pursuit brought him face to face with one of the most critical sectors of the time, American railroads. As the 1900s approached, the situation in America was interesting. Powerful monopolies had formed in industries such as oil and steel, but railroad companies were trying to compete by lowering prices. For Morgan, this was not a problem, but an opportunity. Instead of lowering prices to compete, it made more sense to merge and create a centralized structure. He began acquiring financially weak companies and consolidating them under a single center. He determined long-term strategies for these restructured companies. These strategies were so effective that they entered financial literature under the name Morganization. Morganization referred to the restructuring of financially weak companies under centralized control through strong financing. The efforts produced results in a short time. Companies became more profitable, and stability was established in the sector. At the time, approximately 60% of the American stock market consisted of railroad companies. Morgan, directly or indirectly, controlled nearly one-third of these companies. This corresponded to about 20% of the stock market, a figure that clearly demonstrates how influential Morgan was in financial markets. In 1901, Morgan encountered a major obstacle. The Northern Securities Company, whose formation Morgan had led, was sued by President Theodore Roosevelt. The reason was the violation of competition in the railroad sector. As a result of the lawsuit, the company's operations were halted. This was a major blow to Morgan. However, in Morgan's mind, even larger moves were beginning to take shape, moves that would affect not only railroads, but the entire American economy. Andrew Carnegie, who was earning $40 million annually from the steel industry, was growing old. He wanted to withdraw from active business life and devote his wealth to philanthropy. But who would take over an operation of that scale? Of course, John Pierpont Morgan. The price of $480 million that Carnegie set for his company was immediately accepted by Morgan. This sale was unprecedented in size, but it was only the beginning. Morganization was once again at work. John merged major steel producers and founded United States Steel. With a value of $1.4 billion, U.S. Steel became the first company in the world to reach a billion-dollar valuation. At the time, the total value of the entire American manufacturing sector was $12.5 billion. United States Steel took control of more than 60% of American steel production. Thus, Morgan became the decisive force in two critical sectors, railroads and steel. This represented not only wealth, but also stability and security. As his wealth grew, Morgan invested in different sectors. He financed Edison's work on electricity. Morganization continued. He merged Edison's electric company with its competitors and supported the birth of General Electric. Similarly, he laid the foundations of AT&T to centralize the communications infrastructure. Morgan's tactic was always the same: to gather competition under a single center backed by strong capital, thereby ensuring stability and trust. In 1893, the United States experienced one of the most severe economic crises in its history. Years of rapid growth, excessive borrowing, and uncontrolled investments finally collapsed. Stock prices lost nearly half their value. Thousands of companies closed, hundreds of banks failed, and widespread unemployment followed. As a result of the crisis, investors panicked. They began cashing in American bonds and demanding gold. At the time, the dollar was tied to the gold standard. This meant that every paper bill in circulation had to be backed by physical gold, at least $100 million worth. After 2 years, reserves were almost completely depleted. Only $9 million in gold remained in the Treasury. The risk of the government defaulting on its debts emerged. A mechanism was needed to manage the crisis, and at the time, America had no central bank. At this point, Morgan stepped onto the stage and presented the president with an extraordinary plan. Let me guess. Morganization. Morgan proposed forming a consortium with the country's largest bankers. By bringing European investors into the process, he claimed he could rapidly strengthen America's gold reserves. How would he do this? He would provide $65 million in gold in exchange for 30-year gold bonds. That was the plan. With no better alternative, the president accepted the proposal. According to rumors, all the bonds were sold within 22 minutes. The market calmed, and confidence was restored. Morgan had saved America from collapse. Morgan had suppressed the crisis. However, this caused public discomfort. The idea that the fate of the country rested in the hands of a banker was questioned by the public. Yet this was the reality, and it did not change. Morgan had saved America from economic disaster. In 1907, a similar situation occurred again. Conditions became so severe that President Roosevelt, despite having a poor relationship with Morgan, asked him for help. John brought together the country's largest bankers. At this meeting, it was decided how much capital would be transferred to which banks. Millions of dollars were injected into the system. Once again, the system was revived. Public outrage resurfaced with the same question. Why did the country's economy constantly require the intervention of a single financier? An investigation was launched. The committee examined the background of financial power on Wall Street, and Morgan became the symbol of this investigation. Over the age of 70 and struggling with illness, Morgan was deeply worn down during this period. Interestingly, Morgan was supposed to be aboard the Titanic on its maiden voyage. However, due to health issues, he canceled his trip at the last moment and did not board the ship. According to the committee's report, a permanent solution was needed. Relying on Morgan for help during every crisis was not a rational approach. As a result, the foundations of the American Central Bank, known today as the Federal Reserve, were laid. John Pierpont Morgan, who accomplished great things during his 76-year life, earned vast sums of money, saved America from collapse twice, and left his mark on economic literature, passed away in Rome on March 31st, 1913. After his death, his son took over the business. The company continued to grow and make new acquisitions for years. In 2000, it merged with Chase Bank and became J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. Today, with approximately $3 trillion in assets, it is one of the largest banks in the world. John Pierpont Morgan is remembered as a controversial figure. Some call him a greedy monopolist. Others remember him as one of the architects of modern America. However, one thing must be acknowledged without question. He was one of the most important figures in the establishment of America's economic infrastructure. If this story gave you a new perspective, please like the video and subscribe. On this channel, I will tell you the story behind the money.